For those of you joining us on the recording, welcome to Week 5 U.S. History Seminar, our second one for the week. So here I'm going to go ahead and share screen and we'll get started here. I don't need video. There we be, I think. Yeah, come on. There we go. All right, so announcements as we get started. The Unit 1 test, grace period for that ended yesterday. So hopefully you got that done and turned in. With the tests, I mean, you only get the week plus the 5-day grace period to turn those in. But, you know, they're not super duper long or anything. So if you find that your grade right now looks pretty bad because you have not turned some stuff in, realize that we're just getting started and things can improve, but you have to start changing your habits now and getting stuff turned in. We will have mid-quarter grades will be stored Monday morning. It is my goal to get the test in for that grade report so that you have as accurate a snapshot of your grade as possible. Please realize mid-quarter grades, that's all it is. It's a snapshot in time. Things will change because like probably later that day, I will put in the seminar work for this week. So that will change your grade. So realize that things will update, things will change. I'm not saying don't worry about your grade, but some of you probably need to change habits at this point because a number of folks are not turning in major things, and that's going to get you into trouble. You should now be working on the Unit 2 reading guide. This is only a 2-chapter guide. From here on out, the last reading guide, the Unit 1, was a beast. This one and moving forward, I think the biggest one we have moving forward is a 3-chapter. I do not think we have any more 4-chapter ones on the docket, as I'm recalling. So things should not be quite as bad as Unit 1 was. That was hard, and I apologize for that. We ended up combining. I was hoping to get to the 1920s first semester. That didn't happen. So anyway, make a plan. Get started now. It's 8 sections of the textbook. If you count the days we've already gone through, and next week, you will have had 10 class days to get this done. So if you have been doing a section a day, you're going to finish with 2 days to spare. Just a reminder, anything you submit needs to be a typed digital file. This is more a reminder I've had to point out during the Montana studies class, but I am still getting the occasional or the attempted, oh, I took a picture of my handwriting, can I turn that in? No, I'm sorry. If writing stuff out longhand is your process, which I totally respect that, that's actually a really good tool if you find that you're struggling to remember things and process things. Writing out answers longhand is actually a brain-based solution to help you do that. But if that's your process, then you need to build in the time to then type your response. What I would maybe do if you're going to go that route is read the section. You should always read the book first before trying to answer the questions. Actually read the section. If you're just looking at the question, hunting through the chapter, looking for those words, you're not going to understand anything. But read the section, then begin answering the questions, and then when you get done answering that set of questions, then type it out. Then type it and you're good to go. That way you're not faced, the day of the due date, you have this giant thing you have to type. Remember, docx, or PDF format is what I will accept on that. Remember, you do have a discussion forum this week, week 5 discussion forum. Your participation in that needs to be done by tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Remember, that's a response to the main prompt and then a reply to at least 2 classmates' posts. I'm getting an occasional people will email me and say that they can respond to the main prompt, but then it won't let them reply. They're getting invalid parameter errors. So far, both I and the Moodle wizards have we have a means of logging in as you, and I don't like to do that. I really try not to do that. But if I have to check something, what I'll do is I'll log in as you and I'll try and replicate the problem. And so far, I can't replicate the problem on my end, which means that it's more than likely not a problem with the Moodle server. It's something with your web browser. It's something with your computer. So if you start getting those invalid parameter errors before contacting me, okay, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can, but before contacting me, clear your browser cache and delete all of the data associated with your browser. You could also try using a different browser if you're not on a Chromebook. If you're on a Chromebook, you're kind of stuck with Chrome. But if you're on a Mac or a Windows machine and you've been using Chrome, maybe download Firefox. Firefox is a great browser option. And for Virtual Academy, we've always told students that Firefox is the one that actually works better with Moodle. I don't know what changed this year that we decided that Chrome was the one that we're supporting, but you could always try Firefox. I find I'm a Mac guy. Safari works fine for me 99.9% of the time. So, always have a couple browser options that you can go to. That way you kind of know, okay, well, if the problem repeats with another browser, then it's not a browser issue. Maybe it is something on the Moodle server. Maybe it's something with my internet access. But that gives us really gives the Moodle wizards something to go off of. I'm very limited in what I can help you do tech-wise, unless you're running a Mac. I know a lot about Macs. I know hardly anything about Windows machines. So yeah, just make sure if you get those errors, try clearing the browser cache, try a different browser, see if that helps. Try a different computer too. If you have access to another computer, just see if you can hop on a parent's computer real quick and just see if you can post from there. That way we can narrow down where the issue is. Don't forget the seminar assignments, the Week 5 CNN 10 News Quiz, and the Week 5 Seminar Journal. The topic for that will be given at the end of this session. Also, it will be in the presentation deck document that I will post along with the video. And again, please join the Remind. I'm still having to reiterate things that I post to the Remind because of people not being on the Remind. It's more an issue again with the Montana class, but if you're not in the Remind, please join or have a parent join. Odds are one of you has a cell phone and you can at least have access to the updates, because like last weekend when they were doing maintenance on the computer system here and things were going to be down, I sent that out to everybody via Remind. I don't really have another means of sending that stuff out. So please join the Remind. It makes all of our lives ever so much easier. Any questions about the announcements? And if you have questions as we're going through this, please unmute yourself and ask if possible. I'm not always looking at the chat. So, if I miss it in the chat, please unmute yourself and say, hey, stop. I do that every week. There we go. All right. So our topic today is why did World War II begin? What was kind of the underlying causes and the players that end up sort of starting this? We need to talk about this before we can talk about, you know, America's involvement. We need to see how we go from the war to end all wars, which is what they called World War One. Or, you know, back then it wasn't World War One, it was just the World War or the Great War. How we go in the space of 20 years from signing that Treaty of Versailles to, oh, we're back at it. You know, we're at war again. Europe is in chaos, and there's stuff going on in the Pacific. How does that happen? So we're going to look at the, you know, kind of the 5 countries most majorly involved here, as well as some of the underlying causes. Okay, so the Treaty of Versailles is actually a major cause of the Second World War, which is ironic because the Treaty of Versailles was supposed to keep this sort of thing from ever happening again. In addition to placing huge financial impositions on a country like Germany, you also have the treaty taking land away from countries like Germany, Russia, soon to become the Soviet Union, China, and you have land going to other groups that will end up becoming a part of this going forward. But one of the biggest things that comes out of the Treaty of Versailles, and this was the one thing that Woodrow Wilson wanted above everything else. Remember, Wilson had sort of released his idea for the post-war peace, and it was called the 14 points. And he gets to Paris, and the other victorious countries go, "We do not like the 14 points." And Wilson goes, "Fine, they're gone, but just keep this one." The one that he wanted to keep, the one that he thought was most important, was the League of Nations. Wilson felt that we needed an international organization that had the ability to allow countries to go there to mediate disputes, to push for disarmament on a global level. And remember, it supposedly this was also about collective security, that an attack on one league nation was an attack on the league itself, that if one country got attacked, one member of the league got attacked, the rest of the league was going to jump in and pound them. That was the idea. Did it work out that way? Not so much. So few problems here. Number one, the US never joins. So one of the great powers of the world, there were no superpowers at this point. That's a term that comes about after the Second World War. But there were great powers. And the great powers of the world included the United States, Russia, Germany, Britain, France, Italy, Japan, to a certain extent, China. A lot of these, and a number of those countries either weren't represented or they were not initially invited to join. The United States never joined. We never ratified the Treaty of Versailles. We eventually passed a document that said, yeah, we're no longer fighting the war, but we never joined the League. That's going to be one of the things that seals the fate of the League. Russia was not invited to join. 2 reasons for that. Number one, Russia was a communist. Their ruling government was communist, and one of their stated aims was they wanted to spread communism to other industrialized nations. And the other industrialized nations kind of went, we don't want to be communist, thank you. So they sort of shunned Russia. And then the other thing was Russia was in the midst of a civil war at this point. And by the way, Russia did not so much trust the West as the United States, France, and Britain sent special military forces to aid the non-communist side of the Russian Civil War. So already the East and the West not so much getting along. Japan was a major member of the League. Japan is going to vamoose out of the League when and we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but Japan leaves the league. Germany was not initially invited to be a part of the league. They will eventually join, but then they will also exit the league after their national sovereignty is questioned. The nations that withdraw because the league is a threat to something called national sovereignty, the ability of a country to make their own decisions. That was why the US did not join the league. We did not want to have a situation where, oh, well, one night Romania gets drunk and attacks Bulgaria, and all of a sudden we have to send troops and go off to war. We wanted to maintain our national sovereignty. And these other countries, Japan, Germany, Italy, withdrew from the league after the league questioned what they were doing. They were saying basically, we value our national sovereignty. We don't report to the league. And so we're not going to be members of the league anymore. The league couldn't get members to intervene in conflicts. Everything from the Italian invasion of Ethiopia to Hitler's invasion of the various areas around Germany, the league would go, oh, you shouldn't do that. But nobody wanted to actually step up and try and stop any of it from happening. And again, the whole thing was national sovereignty. Nobody wanted to surrender their right to make their own decisions. And that ultimately dooms the league. By the way, the picture is of the Palace of Nations in Geneva, which is where the league met. The league headquarters was in Geneva, Switzerland. Nowadays, that building still exists, but it is part of the United Nations. The league basically folds into the United Nations after World War II. Okay, so let's talk about some of the countries that become so involved in World War II. The first one we're going to talk about is Japan. So as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, Japan was given a little bit of China as a territorial concession, to which, by the way, the Chinese go, excuse us, we were on the winning side too. Why are we losing territory? Which is kind of what the Russians did too. They were like, excuse me? Why are we losing territory? But that was not enough for Japan. Remember, Japan had proposed a racial equality provision to go into the league, and that was defeated by basically a parliamentary maneuver from Woodrow Wilson. And so Japan, remember, left the Versailles Conference basically saying, if we want to advance as a country, if we want to become self-sufficient, Japan was reliant upon trade because they're a small island. They didn't have lots of natural resources. They basically said, if we want to be self-sufficient and not reliant on other countries, we need to go out and take territory. So they're going to start doing this in China. They're going to take over the Chinese area known as Manchuria in 1931 and 1932. They rename it Manchukuo. And that was highly aggressive. They were brought in front of the league, and the league did nothing. They were like, well, it just sucks to be you guys, I guess. But this was not the worst thing that happened. That will come in about 1937 into 1938 with an event that's known as the Rape of Nanjing. And I wish I were speaking the rape as a metaphor. No, this was literally the Japanese army raping the women of the Nanjing province in China. And again, this was 1937 into 1938. And to give you an idea, this is an account from people who were serving in the German embassy at the time. These were Nazis. If the Nazis think you've gone too far in how you're treating the area that you're conquering, that's a decent indication that this is probably pretty bad. I'm going to warn you that this description is a bit graphic. And my purpose in reading it to you is not to disturb you, but to show you what was going on. So this is again from a member of the German embassy staff, the legation secretary of the German embassy. And he reports, on December 13th, about 30 soldiers came to a Chinese house at number 5 Hsing-Lu-Ku in the southeastern part of Nanjing and demanded entrance. The door was opened by the landlord, a Mohammedan named Ha. He was Muslim. They killed him immediately with a revolver, and also Mrs. Ha, who knelt before them after Ha's death, begging them not to kill anyone else. Mrs. Ha asked them why they killed her husband, and they shot her. Mrs. Hsia was dragged out from under a table in the guest hall where she had tried to hide with her 1-year-old baby. After being stripped and raped by one or more men, she was bayoneted in the chest and then had a bottle thrust into her most private of areas. The baby was killed with a bayonet. Some soldiers then went to the next room where Mrs. Hsia's parents, aged 76 and 74, and her 2 daughters, aged 16 and 14, were. They were about to rape the girls when the grandmother tried to protect them. The soldiers killed her with a revolver. The grandfather grasped the body of his wife and was killed. The 2 girls were then stripped, the elder being raped by 2 to 3 men, and the younger by 3. The older girl was stabbed afterwards, and a cane was rammed in her most private of areas. The younger girl was bayoneted, but also was spared the horrible treatment that had been meted out to her sister and mother. The soldiers then bayoneted another sister of between 7 and 8, who was also in the room. The last murders in the house were of Ha's 2 children, aged 4 and 2, respectively. The older was bayoneted, and the younger split down through the head with a sword. Okay, and again, my purpose in reading you that was not to shock you or upset you, but to show you the absolutely terrible treatment. And this was something that, as World War II goes on and America becomes involved, as Japan is conquering areas like the Philippines, this sort of treatment was common. It was maybe a bit worse in Nanjing, but the Japanese treatment of the Philippine and American prisoners of war was almost as horrific. This is a photo of a bunch of dead bodies along the Qinhui River out of Nanjing's West Gate. This is a boy who was killed by a Japanese soldier with the butt of a rifle, reportedly because the boy would not take off his hat. And then, so this picture is just another shot of They were very thorough. There are a lot of pictures of this, some of which I would not put in here, including a very graphic photo of a cane sticking out of a woman's most private areas. But this is another. What I'm going to read to you now is from a survivor of this incident named Tang Junshan. And she reports, the 7th and last person in the first row was a pregnant woman. The soldier thought he might as well rape her before killing her, so he pulled her out of the group to a spot about 10 meters away. As he was trying to rape her, the woman resisted fiercely. The soldier abruptly stabbed her in the belly with a bayonet. She gave a final scream as her intestines spilled out. Then the soldier stabbed the fetus with its umbilical cord clearly visible and tossed it aside. Okay, so again, this just shows the absolute horror. And lest you think that, oh, Americans are so much better than this, this is the sort of thing that American soldiers did to Native Americans on several occasions in the United States. So please do not think that I'm, claim, oh, Americans are more civilized than this. Not entirely. Okay, so moving on from that sunshine and light, we're going to come to the Soviet Union. So beginning in about 1922, the first leader of the Soviet Union, Vladimir Lenin, will die. and there is a jockeying for succession. By 1927, that is over, and one man has emerged to be basically the supreme leader of the Soviet Union, and that is a gentleman by the name of Joseph Stalin, who you see on the left in that picture. Stalin will basically eliminate anyone who opposed him. He initially was sort of co-running the government with a guy named Leon Trotsky, who was very close to Lenin, and he will force Trotsky out of the Soviet Union. Trotsky will land in Mexico, where local communists working for Stalin will kill Trotsky. He will stab him in the back with an ice pick. So it does that just outside of Mexico City. So yeah, Stalin, even across the world, Stalin is able to have his opposition killed, which is what happens to Leon Trotsky. But so beginning in 1927 was Stalin's complete reign over the Soviet Union that lasts into the 1950s. One of the things Stalin does is collectivization of agriculture. This means that all private land in the Soviet Union that had not already been taken by the government was now controlled by the government, and all of the peasants that had worked that land are placed into basically centralized control on these collective farms. And these were not nice places to live and work. Lots of people starved. They died of overwork. They died from being whipped. They were essentially slaves in all but name. Stalin used state-sponsored terrorism and secret police to purge his political opponents. Many of them ended up either sent out of the country where they were ultimately killed, like Trotsky, or you had people that were sent in the middle of the night. They would be taken from their homes, and they would wind up most likely in Siberia, which is the coldest, most awful place in the Soviet Union, into these gulag camps where they would be worked until they died. These people were never heard from or seen again. They died in forced labor camps. It is likely, it's hard to know because Stalin was so secretive, how many people he ultimately killed, but most historians estimate that it was in the neighborhood of 10 million. Of various ethnicities and political opponents. He likely killed more Jewish people than Hitler did. And Hitler is believed to have killed at least 6 million Jewish people in the Holocaust, and it's likely that Stalin killed more than that. So yeah, Stalin does sign an agreement with the Nazis where they divide up basically Eastern Europe, particularly Poland. Poland had been made up originally of land taken from Germany and land taken from then Russia. And so Stalin and Hitler sign an agreement with their foreign ministers sign an agreement that agrees that they will basically divide up that territory. So Hitler takes the western portion of Poland, Stalin takes the eastern portion of Poland, along with Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and a bunch of other territory. And places like Poland basically cease to exist. All because of a gentleman's agreement between the two. And that lasts until Hitler decides to basically do something dumb like attack the Soviet Union. But yeah, Stalin, brutally repressive, and was one of the reasons why this war started. He was an ally of Hitler before he became Hitler's enemy. Italy. So Italy was really the first one of these countries to make that sort of rightward turn toward authoritarianism, really starting in about 1922, which is when Benito Mussolini comes to power in Italy. Mussolini had been a newspaper editor. He was a veteran, and he promised that he was going to make Italy into a more orderly society. Italy was a fairly new country. I mean, Italy had not been Italy for very long. Italy had been a collection of little city-states, and it had not been very long that Italy had been one cohesive country. And Italy was very sort of disorderly. To this day, Italy is not a very orderly country. They've had like 60 some prime ministers since World War II. I mean, it's ridiculous. They are constantly changing over their government. But so Mussolini takes over. He is not elected at first. He takes over when his supporters literally march on the nation's capital. His supporters who were armed were known as the Black Shirts. This, if you know anything about the Nazis, you know that Hitler's shock troops were known as the Brown Shirts. And so without Mussolini, Hitler wouldn't have ever had a lot of his ideas. Mussolini's like the grand pappy of European fascism. So Mussolini continues to consolidate his power during the 20s and into the 1930s. And in 1935, after sort of branching out slightly here and there, taking over little chunks of land, Mussolini goes after Ethiopia. And his goal was to create a new Roman Empire, specifically into Africa. This was a highly racist thing. I mean, really, the thought was, who's going to really jump in and defend these black people? And that kind of held true in the League of Nations. The king of Ethiopia, the emperor of Ethiopia, a guy by the name of Haile Selassie, will appear himself in front of the League. He goes to the League himself. He had sought refuge in Britain. Actually, a lot of Europe's leaders sought refuge in Britain during World War II. There was a time when the hotels of Britain were full of basically deposed leaders, of which one was Haile Selassie. And Selassie gave one of the most famous, most notable, most brilliant speeches in the history of the League of Nations. And as a result of that, nothing happened. The League said, oh, Benito Mussolini, you shouldn't do that. But nobody was willing to actually commit any troops to help Haile Selassie. And what's more, Mussolini took that opportunity to say, oh, you invited the Emperor of Ethiopia to speak? Italy withdraws from the League. We're done. We're out. So, yeah, Italy leaves the League and basically says, you're not going to control us. Our national sovereignty is too important. And then finally, we get to Germany. So Hitler had tried to come to power shortly after Mussolini did in the mid-1920s. That doesn't go very well. He's arrested in Munich in what's known as the Beer Hall Putsch, where he tries to take over the government by force. He spends some time in jail. While he's in jail, he writes a book called Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. And in it lays out his plans to basically what he would do if he ever came to power. And if anyone had bothered to take that book seriously, they never would have supported Hitler. But people don't really take him seriously. He gets out and he sets about basically turning the Nazis into a proper political party. So Hitler gains power in a relatively legitimate manner. In 1933, the Nazis are one of several parties in the Reichstag, or the parliament, and they refuse to join a coalition government. And the president of Germany at the time was a guy named Hindenburg. And Hindenburg says, okay, we need to get governing here. We need to get parliament started. So let's just make Hitler chancellor, which is like the prime minister. Let's make Hitler chancellor, and I'll control Hitler. I, Hindenburg, will control Hitler. He's, he was a soldier. I am a famous general. Hindenburg was like the general figure of Germany. And so Hindenburg thought, well, I can control Hitler. And in the early days, he was doing that. I mean, Hitler never appeared in military uniform next to Hindenburg because he would have looked like an idiot. Hindenburg was this great decorated general, all these medals, and Hitler had been like basically a corporal in the German army in World War I. So next to Hindenburg, he would have looked like an idiot. So he did not wear a military uniform around Hindenburg. But then a couple things are going to happen. Number one, Hindenburg's going to die. He was old. Hindenburg was an old guy, and he's going to die. And pretty shortly thereafter, there's going to be a fire at the Reichstag. And the Reichstag is going to vote Hitler emergency powers to investigate this. Hitler uses that to get rid of all other political parties in Germany and combines the offices of chancellor and president into one thing, which becomes known as der Führer, or the supreme leader of Germany. And Hitler's off to the races. So Hitler basically had unchecked authority, and into this is going to step the League of Nations in one last ditch effort to be something. And this is going to happen because of an absolutely unknown guy in Germany, a private citizen named Franz Bernheim. Franz Bernheim was a Jewish worker, and he is going to write to the League of Nations, petition the League of Nations, saying that the League was overseeing Germany, which they were on a 15-year agreement, and that these new Nazi laws were restricting. He had lost his job because he was Jewish. And the League will side with Bernheim. The League will say, yeah, you can't do this, Germany. But shortly after that, I mean, it's a couple of months where the Nazis have to get rid of these laws in this certain area of Germany. The 15 years elapses. And the Nazis reinstate the laws, and they withdraw from any participation in the League. They basically say, we're no longer bound by you, League of Nations. We're out. Hitler out. Mic drop. But Franz Bernheim, which, by the way, if you look him up on Wikipedia, he does not have a Wikipedia page. He is completely unknown. They don't know what exactly happened to him, except that he was not heard from after the war. It's likely that he was sent to a concentration camp or just outright killed in his home. He was never heard from again. But the act that he did, petitioning the League, was very, very important. But again, this shows that the League could not withstand claims of national sovereignty. And in the end, the League was completely powerless to stop or rein in Hitler. And things continue to get worse and worse and worse in Germany. And this includes a night called Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, the night of November 8th into the morning of November 9th, 1938, when Nazis and average Germans will burn synagogues, they will destroy Jewish businesses, and they will just basically beat the crap and kill a bunch of Jewish people just for being Jewish. And it was not just Jewish people, but that was the main target of this violence and of the future Holocaust, were Jews, but also Slavs, Hungarians, Polacks, homosexuals, people with physical disabilities. Basically anyone that did not live up to Hitler's idea of racial and physical superiority, which is ironic because Hitler himself was brown-haired and from Austria. But be that as it may, lots of people get lots of places by being hypocrites, and Hitler is certainly one of them. But yeah, Kristallnacht was an absolutely horrible, awful thing that really showed what the Nazis were prepared to do to specifically the Jewish people, but lots of other groups as well. All right, so with that, your journal topic for this week. Describe 2 of the causes of World War II presented in this session, or 2 of the countries that helped start the war and how they helped to do that. Okay, so that is your topic. Are there any questions about anything that we covered in the session today? Looking at the chat, nobody has typed anything into the chat. Okay, if there are no questions, I am going to allow you to be free. If you have something you need to talk to me about, hang out and we'll discuss it. Have a great day. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye. And then there were none.